How's it going, everybody? This is the Conscious Bodybuilding Podcast. Today, I have Guillermo Escalante on, which, first off, I got to say, is probably one of the coolest names I've ever heard. I always think about that, like when I'm reading your any paper you've written or anything. I come across your name. I think it's just a cool name. um, but Guillermo has his PhD. You have a ton of qualifications. Maybe could you briefly touch on um, what your qualifications are, what you went to school for, and all that stuff?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, my undergraduate degree is in athletic training. I have a bachelor's degree in athletic training and a minor in biology. So I took a lot of the pre-med OChem, the physiology, anatomy, all that good stuff. I have a master's in business administration with concentrations in marketing and healthcare management. And then I went back to school about 5 years after practicing and establishing my business. And I got a doctor of science in athletic training with an emphasis in rehabilitation, sports medicine, and tied in a lot of the performance stuff. So sports nutrition and integrated a lot of the other passions that I have. When I finished my undergrad, I also became a certified athletic trainer. I became a certified strength and conditioning specialist, and then over the years, I became certified through the International Society of Sports Nutrition, and then eventually through my contributions in research and both as an editor and as a researcher in the field of sports nutrition, I earned to become a fellow in the International Society of Sports Nutrition. So currently I'm a professor of kinesiology. I just got promoted to full professor this year. I've been there for about 10 years. And I'm also a Dean Fellow for the College of Natural Sciences. So I work with a lot of the science students, so chem, biochemistry, biology, all of those students. And I also, of course, work with our kinesiology students. And a lot of my research is in the area of sports performance enhancement, body composition, sports nutrition, nutritional supplementation, and really anything that's related to injury prevention, performance enhancement, muscle hypertrophy, basically how to get bigger, faster, stronger, and how to stay in the gym healthier. And because I'm a bodybuilder, a lot of my research over the last several years has actually really been very specifically focused on putting the scientific lens into the practices of bodybuilding and really trying to be as evidence-based as possible within our field, kind of applying what I've been practicing for the last 20 plus years, and really trying to put the scientific lens through it.
Yeah, that's amazing. And that's kind of how I found you. I think a couple of those posts you had shared were really relevant to me as a bodybuilder. And it was really cool to see someone sharing this. I think you're really awesome in the fact that you are also a practicing bodybuilder. So you have this experience and you're applying the data alongside your practical experience, and you get this really, really great perspective in a lot of the things that you post and you talk about, and in the research that you contribute to too. So it's been really cool to see see that from you. And one thing that you kind of touched on is you're a competitive bodybuilder as well. First of all, could you touch on your most recent competitive season? And I'm also curious how you balance your work with bodybuilding, because like right now, like I'm a 2 weeks out from a show, and I'm not someone who suffers from like impaired cognitive ability per se, but the actual general fatigue, it makes it really difficult. And then you're battling self-control on top of that. It makes it hard to sit down and work sometimes, and it definitely requires more effort. So touch on your competitive season, and then maybe some things that you do to kind of balance the two, because it's difficult for sure, and I think that shouldn't go without being mentioned.
Oh no, yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah, no, this year has been a really good year. I focused on the NPC Universe. That was kind of my main goal show. So that was a little more than 2 weeks ago. It was a successful showing. I placed third in the men's open
Wow.
middleweight division. I placed fifth in the men's 35 and over. Funny, actually, the older divisions were the harder divisions. In the 40 and over, I actually placed out of the top five.
Wow.
But it was a good showing nonetheless. I felt I brought a good package, but obviously I need to fine tune a little bit more to earn that IFBB Pro card. The bodybuilding is just one of those, as you know, it's one of those where you just have to compete against yourself and show up and beat your best. And I think I definitely beat my best from my 2020 season. Probably was close to my all-time best, but I think I've definitely have had a couple shows where I've been probably a little sharper. I would say, my best showing was probably the 2013 LA Championships. I actually beat Danny Hester in the men's open middleweight division, and I took second next to Breon Ansley. So I stepped on stage with some monsters at that show. They both went on to become pro. That same year. I went to the USA's the following week. I just missed my mark. I tried to go down to the welterweight division, and it kind of backfired on me. And I didn't look as good as I could have looked, but I actually peaked pretty well at that last show. But anyway, that was my competitive year. I felt I brought on a lot more size. I did a strategy in 2020, which was kind of crazy. I actually said I hadn't been a lightweight in over 20 years, and I said I'm going to try to get down to that lightweight class. And in order for me to get there, I had to really, really deplete myself and really dehydrate myself to get down there. And the idea was to kind of fill out in that 24-hour period after weigh-ins, but it wasn't enough time. And, I couldn't eat enough. My stomach was distended, and it was a mess, but I placed 7th at the USA's in 2020 in the lightweight class, but I really did not look very good. I was flat and really not as conditioned as I could have been. So I was happy to redeem myself from the 2020 show and that self-experiment. But that's what I love about bodybuilding. I've really kind of, I have tons and tons of these, I call my little black books of notes of everything that I've done for the last 20 years. And, everything from what I weigh to what I ate to what I look like, what I place, and and if everything that I did is written down, and it really kind of helps me see, hey, like what's worked for me, and how have I applied these principles, and what can I learn from everything that I've done, and of course applying some of the evidence-based stuff to see how things work. So it's been a fun ride.
Yeah, most definitely. I think that data collection. Oh yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, I forgot to mention the other part, which was the second part of your question. How do I balance the academics and work? And I would say it's definitely challenging. This year, I was actually quite I'm going to say lucky in the way that I'm going to say strategic, because it really was strategic. I finished teaching in May, and then I didn't teach a summer course, so I really had a few weeks to be able to do that. But that being said, I also had a couple of conferences where I had to fly across the country and come back. But so it took a little bit of balancing, but there was a little bit less on my plate where I could, I'm still working and overseeing some things at the office, but it's not a 40, 50 hour work week. I don't have students that I have to see, on a regular basis. So it's basically a 20-hour work week, and then I can kind of spend most of my time with the training. Of course, I'll have to prepare for these talks and traveling, and that was a little bit challenging. But I try to be as strategic as possible in terms of mitigating my workload. Earlier in this, I try to kind of front load anything that's busier when it's not as difficult. So if I have a lot of projects or whatnot, I try to put those early on in the prep rather than later in the prep when things are pretty challenging and bodybuilding kind of consumes you, those last 8-10 weeks.
No, that's really smart, kind of periodizing your workload along with that's
a great word.
and knowing that you have that challenge coming up. I've done that myself as well, where I kind of know, hey, I'm starting to feel this way, what can I plan in the next month or two? Can I reduce some of that workload on myself in order to make sure that I'm successful at this. On the other side of that too, having no work is also probably not great, because you sit around and you think about food, and it actually makes it a little more challenging. Sometimes being busy is a little more advantageous. It's just being mindful of that fatigue and being on your feet and doing all those things, I think, and being able to take a step back when you need to. But that's really smart that you did that. Is kind of like, hey, I know that I got this thing coming up. It's going to be pretty challenging. What can I do to kind of reduce that workload, on the front end first? So that's really smart. Yeah, that's really cool that you mentioned all that. To touch on the data collection process, I think the data collection appeals to the nerd in all of us, or the scientist in all of us, and that's something that I'm really big on, is collecting that data, because that allows you to just kind of further refine your process as you go along. And like you mentioned, like beating your best. Well, if you have a lot of data as to what produced a good look, obviously, I was just watching the podcast with you and Scott Stevenson. Like, you can be different season to season, but you have a good idea for how your physiology works after a while, to some degree. Like, hey, I can't load with these carbs, or I can't do this strategy. Like for example, that I shouldn't try to squeeze down, a weight cap potentially, or at least in that aggressive, because it's really difficult for me to load really quickly if I have to make weight or something like that, right? And having those little data points, like, this is my first time prepping myself, but now that I have all this data, like, I'm so excited. I got a show in 2 weeks, but I'm also excited to be applying that next season. Even now, I'm like, oh, I'm going to do this and this, and it's really crazy. I mean, when you're really process oriented, like how you start like planning out the next phase, and then just like getting really excited for all that. But I don't know if you feel that way about prep and all that stuff, but
No, I love it. Now, just to be clear, are you doing the USAs in a couple of weeks?
yeah,
Is that your show?
yeah, I'm doing the USAs.
Awesome, awesome.
Yeah,
And then what division will you be in?
I'll be in bodybuilding, heavyweight.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's always a monster show. I love the USAs.
yeah,
It's a great show. I've probably done that show the most. It's just always a little more convenient, kind of closer in my
yeah.
backyard. But
Same here.
yeah, so I love that. I love that show, and it's run well. So well,
Yeah,
good luck. I wish you the best.
thank you. I appreciate that.
I know it's hard these last few weeks, and but it's great that you're in good position to do that.
Yeah, most definitely. It'll be worth it for sure. And I've been bodybuilding for a very long time. It's gonna be my first crack at like going for a national level show. So I'm really excited to have the opportunity. As difficult as it can be, it's also very rewarding. Yeah, and there's some monsters going in this year. I'm really excited to see where I stack up against some of these guys. Like, they're freaks, man. It's really cool to see, because I feel like maybe the last couple of years, it did get diluted a little bit because of COVID and stuff. Because I went to the show last year, and there were still some good guys in there, but it just wasn't as stacked of like a lineup. Like, there was like some gaps in between. So I'm like really excited to see where I stand next to some of these guys coming out of the woodworks. Like, you've never heard of them before, and they're like freaky. But yeah, that's kind of enough on that.
So yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that. I've noticed that myself with bodybuilding. I mean, because I've been doing it for so long, and in the early 2000s, the USAs was always every class. I mean, my first USA as a lightweight, there were almost 50 plus guys in the lightweight class.
Yeah,
and then I mean, it was insane. And then they kind of started kind of slowly trickling down as more of these other divisions kind of started opening up. But it was always still fairly competitive, 15, 20, 25 guys maybe.
Mm-hmm.
And then there was a period, I want to say between maybe 2014-ish, 15-ish, where it just wasn't as strong for a little bit.
Yeah.
And then it got stronger again. And then COVID came.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then COVID was, obviously like the hiccup on everything. And then now you're right. Like, I'm seeing when I'm looking at some of these shows, like even the universe this year, I mean, I was looking at some of these 50-year-olds and 40-year-olds, and I'm like, holy smack. I mean, like, where are these guys coming from? I'm like, it's amazing. And the old guys are beating the 25 and 30-year-olds. I mean, it's amazing.
I'm seeing, some of those Masters competitors too. It's nuts, man. It's really, really cool to see, like some of the conditioning and just the muscularity that someone were able to bring. Like, I'm super impressed. But it's really cool because, like, even the show I did to qualify, the Dennis James is the promoter, and he saw me like a week before, and he's like, "Oh, it's really cool to see a bodybuilder." And I was like, "What do you mean?" And he's like, "We haven't had a lot of bodybuilders in our show the last couple of years." My class itself was only like 3 guys at this show, which is, it's like it's oh cool. I obviously like won, but it's like also like, I want to kind of see where I stand up next to some more guys, some more bodybuilders too. So it's really cool because I do feel like that over time it is it maybe gets diluted a little bit, but I still think there are bodybuilders out there, and it's always kind of cool to see, as much as classic, and it's all bodybuilding at the end of the day, right? It's like, the process and everything like that. But I at heart was a fundamental bodybuilder. Flexler is the one who got me into bodybuilding. So I always just like, love to see the little bit more bigger physiques and stuff like that. But
the more extreme, absolutely.
yeah, most definitely. So I wanted to get a little bit into that. So talking about your competitive season, about a year ago, you co-authored a peak week paper with a bunch of other great scientists that are doing a lot of great stuff for hypertrophy and sports science and all that, but like a lot of like bodybuilding oriented stuff. Now, in this peak week paper, there's a few things laid out, and I want to. And then recently, you guys published a case study. Was that Chris Bearcat? That was the case study there. Okay, cool.
Yeah,
another person who helped co-author
so he
that.
was one of the authors, and he was also the case study of himself. He was
yeah. So I want to get into the case study, but first I wanted to. So this is my first time even personally messing around with peak week, and I kind of want to just give my audience a little bit of an introduction into what a peak week entails. So if you could first introduce, like, what is the goal of a peak week, and what are some prerequisites that you need before walking into peak week, and what is a peak week really, like what when is it implemented, and things like that.
No, perfect. Well, I think there's the first thing is I think some coaches oversell peak week. It's a great marketing tool to try to kind of boost your sales. Charge a lot of money to get you in transform you in the next 7 to 10 days. It's an easy sell. People are kind of desperate. They're looking for kind of that quick fix, and I think this is where a lot of the misconceptions are. And hopefully, you're working with an ethical coach that will actually tell you, it's like, hey, like, yeah, I mean, we can make some adjustments and I can probably help you get there. But to me, if you come to me like on peak week, looking for that last minute desperation, I want to look better. I'm like, we can probably, peak week is icing on the cake. That's how I explain it. It's icing on the cake. If you are not ready, 3 or 4 weeks before peak week, chances are I'm not going to get you ready, and you're not going to look the way you want to look. And I'm straight up honest with them. And most of the time, I think, unfortunately, people are looking to make up what they haven't done in the last, 4 or 8 or 12 or 20 weeks, whatever the case may be, in that last week. And at the end of the day, I think there's a lot of misconceptions, even in judges. Sometimes I think a lot of judges, sometimes the feedback they give is you need to lose a little more water weight. And realistically, I'm going to say 9 times out of 10, you really just need to be leaner. It's like you probably need to lose an extra 3, 5, 10 pounds of body fat to really do that. That doesn't happen in peak week. If you're trying to lose fat in peak week, you're doing it wrong. Really, peak week is made to really kind of just, again, add that icing on the cake, make it look pretty, and give you that extra little 2-3% to do that. And that being said, I think you have to be very cautious with peak week, because sometimes you look, let's say you're at 97 or 98% and you look pretty darn good. And sometimes trying to get that extra 2 or 3% to get you to that 100% may backfire on you. And now you may actually look at 94 or 93% because you did it wrong. You manipulated too many variables. So, and I know I love talking to John Jewett, because we talk a lot of strategy and different things. And sometimes the more conservative approach is sometimes not necessarily, it can be, there's something to be said for that. Sometimes it's like, if you know what works and you haven't changed all these things, it's like, then you can do it. That being said, if you're going to do peak week right, I think you need to have ample time to be able to practice some of these things, to know how your body is going to adjust and respond to manipulating a lot of these variables. And sometimes manipulating less variables is sometimes better. We know certain variables are going to give you more bang for your buck. They're a little bit safer. They're more tried and true, compared to some of these other variables where you kind of manipulate everything and you kind of hope something sticks. and it's kind of that Vegas gambling mode where, yeah, once in a while you'll go ahead and say, let's say I'm on roulette and say, yeah, I'm going to put $1 million on 7 and it will hit, and you'll look amazing, right? And you'll win, thousands of dollars, right? Millions of dollars. But more often than not, you may miss your mark by manipulating all these variables. So it's not very often that you're going to put $1,000 on 7 and you're going to win every time, right? So
Yeah.
so you may win, and you may win big, but then can you repeat that? Is that going to be a reproducible thing? And the answer is probably no, unless you kind of know. So I like an approach to Peak Week where you can practice some of those variables, maybe 4 or 5 weeks out before your show, and you can kind of anticipate, hey, how many grams of carbs can my body really handle to really carb up well? What kind of carbs can I really handle to really carb up well? Should I manipulate my water or should I not manipulate my water? Should I do a water loading strategy? Should I taper my water? If so, how much should I taper? What about sodium? Should I leave it alone? Should I manipulate it? Does fat loading work for me? And if so, how many grams of fat should I actually utilize? And then training variables are a little bit easier to manipulate. I mean, we have a little bit of science with some of that in terms of hey, I know if I do heavy eccentric work, that's going to make it harder for me you're going to create more muscle damage, more inflammation. It's going to be harder for you to carb up during those types of training. So you can actually implement some of those things. And again, if you're really trying to lose a lot of fat during Peak Week, you're probably not going to be able to take advantage of all of the other components. So that Peak Week really, you should be ready, and you really need to give your body I prefer an ideal Peak Week for me is you can actually feed the body that whole week into the show. You're not even necessarily at a big calorie deficit during that week. You're more of maybe a maintenance or maybe a slight surplus in certain instances to be able to maximize the impact that Peak Week's going to have.
Yeah, most definitely. So yeah, a few prerequisites. It's make sure you're lean enough.
Yep.
Make sure that you understand that it's not going to produce it's the percentage of difference and change is going to be very small. Maybe if you're someone who retains a lot of water, maybe some manipulations could definitely help. But delineating between water and fat, do I really need to lose more water, or do I need to lose 5 or 10 more pounds of fat, right? So that's really important that you mentioned there. Making sure that you're lean enough allows you to also, like you mentioned, drop that fatigue off by bringing your calories up. Like maybe some competitors, especially maybe enhanced competitors, can get away with pushing that deficit, but then you miss out on the benefit of eating more food and kind of dropping maybe potentially some of that water retention from the actual physiological stress of training and diet stress from previous weeks, because you don't have enough resources to even just repair and recover. So and then obviously minimizing eccentric loading, maybe minimizing stretch under load to some degree as well. So not doing these really heavy deadlifts and stuff like that, reducing training fatigue and not training super hard, causing that excessive damage and inflammation. So yeah, those are really great things. I also like that you mentioned John Jewett. I did John Jewett's J3 University, and he's generally pretty conservative, and he likes to hold variables constant. And I think that's a really important thing, especially if you don't have a lot of experience, is probably err on the side of more conservative with your adjustments. And like you mentioned, practice and maybe not even manipulate some of those more intricately woven things. It could be kind of difficult to time sodium and water manipulations. Because that process, once you initiate it takes sometimes some time to, obviously there's an immediate effect, but it also takes some time for those physiological processes to kind of roll. And sometimes you'll be noticing, if I pull water, it's not going to be actualized until the next day. But then if you pull too early, then you get this, antidiuretic effect, and you can have these processes that are in action that take time to recuperate. So I like that idea of, maybe if you're less experienced or you don't even want to play that gamble, just manipulate the fewest things possible, hold the more things constant. And in the paper, you guys mentioned that like it was carbohydrate is one of the biggest, and John mentions this too, is one of the biggest variables that you can manipulate that is going to have the largest effect. So maybe start there, right? So
Exactly.
right, and you know, just maybe just playing with your carbohydrates a little bit, holding your sodium and water and things like that constant. So in that paper, though, let's start with the big pillars. So we have potentially, so we have carbohydrate load and we have intramuscular triglyceride. Could you introduce the intramuscular triglyceride? That was a little bit newer to me. And then any other big pillars you feel like can be manipulated that are maybe a little bit more predictable, a little bit less of a gamble, and then maybe we'll get into sodium and water just a little bit.
Yeah, I think those two that you hit on are probably the ones that are going to have the 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 most benefit and least risk, and so you have a better risk to reward ratio on those because they are relatively easier to put a handle on and to kind of manage. And again, it's important to not manipulate all the other things at the same time because you want to kind of see how these guys kind of play on each other. And
Right.
the nice thing about the fat loading, with the triglycerides, the intramuscular triglycerides, is that it can actually enhance the supercompensation effect of the glycogen loading. So you have these two components. So you have obviously we have glycogen within the muscle that's going to be stored, and then we also have these triglyceride components also within the muscle, which fat can be stored there as well. So if you deplete both of them, now you have basically a smaller version of that muscle cell because you don't have glycogen in there, you don't have that intramuscular triglyceride in there. So and obviously glycogen carries water with it. So now you have a little bit less in there. So now you have basically a smaller version of this muscle with the proteins in there. So how can we hypertrophy that and make that a little bit bigger? Well, obviously the one that everybody knows is obviously through the glycogen supercompensation, which is just basically, hey, consume more carbohydrates. Now we're going to now make the muscle fuller because you're going to drive glycogen in there, and then glycogen is also going to drive water into the muscle, thus giving that more hypertrophic, bigger, fuller look. But the one that often gets missed is we also have that intramuscular triglyceride in there, and you can actually load that as well. And there's actually some evidence to suggest that hey, we can actually tap into this as well, and it can also make the muscle look bigger and fuller. And indeed, it might actually have even a larger effect in the sense as the glycogen. So I think in the paper we actually cited the study of, and we gave an example of a 220-pound bodybuilder that you can actually give it like I want to say it was a 5% fuller muscle realistically. So you can realistically look like you're maybe 2 pounds or so bigger in this large heavyweight, super heavyweight type bodybuilder because of the amount of intramuscular triglycerides that are in there. And there's a reference there in the paper. I don't remember off the top of my head what that reference citation was, but if you read that under the fat loading, you'll actually be able to see that component in there. So what's nice about this is early on during the carb depletion phase, so to really get the super compensation, you need to obviously do a carb depletion phase. How much you deplete kind of depends on the person. So some people maybe need 0 to 50 grams of carbs. Some people may be able to deplete very well on 50 to maybe 150 grams of carbs. It just kind of depends on
and one thing real quickly that you mentioned in the paper was also their nutrition status prior to walking into peak week. Like say they've been already feeding up, maybe they need less of that load going into peak week, right? Because but if they're super depleted, maybe that they're going to be a little bit more sensitive and they're going to need more carbohydrate to fill out.
Exactly. That makes a very big difference. So so maybe if you've already been kind of eating up into the show leading to peak week, then maybe you don't need as much. You need to manipulate less. But you're absolutely right. If you've been really pushing the envelope, your body will be extremely sensitive to things
Right.
that you give it. So that's a great point. So usually once you do that carb depletion, so if the show's kind of on this Saturday, then we're going to kind of go back to a week before. So typically the Saturday before, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, you can actually use those days as your depletion days. But during that depletion stage, you can actually, if you're able to afford it, you can give your body a little bit more calories in the form of fat, and you can now initiate the fat loading during those stages. Now, you don't need 4 full days of fat loading, so you could actually get away with maybe depleting your carbs and your fats on Saturday, Sunday, and then you can actually fat load on Monday, Tuesday. Give yourself a little extra calories there, and then the recommendation there, again, it's an individual basis, but based on the literature that we have currently today, it's about 1 to 2 grams per kilogram of body weight in terms of how much fat you should consume. So
Right.
I was about 80 kilograms, so I was giving myself roughly about 160 grams of fat
Yeah.
on those days,
Hmm.
which is actually quite a bit of fat. And then now the next thing is, well, what kind of fat do you want to do? Well, primarily monounsaturated or polyunsaturated fats is the majority of your fat sources. So things like olive oil, things like avocado, things of that nature. You're going to incorporate some saturated fats in there as well,
Yeah.
but it shouldn't be the majority of your fat sources during that point in time.
And why is that? Saturated fats tend to be a little more inflammatory, right? And there was is there another reason for that?
Yeah, that you basically hit it on the nose. That's
Yeah.
basically the main reason. It's gonna potentially create more inflammation, and it's just gonna be create that issue with the inflammation, which now is going
Yeah.
to counteract with what you're trying to do.
Plus, we don't need any more plaque deposition during peak week. We're already in a compromised health state as it is.
Exactly. So that definitely helps. Then that sets you up nicely for your carbohydrate loading. And then again, the carb loading, we actually give a very big recommendation. I'm going to say variance in the recommendation, because some people don't need a ton of carbs to fill out well. So yeah, the lower end of our recommendation is actually 4 grams per kilogram of body weight, which is not a lot of carbohydrate. So for me at 80 kilos, multiply that by 4, that's really not a lot of carbohydrates. I'm
Right.
basically looking at 300-ish grams of carbohydrates. It's not really a whole lot. But if I go up into, it can go up anywhere from 10 to 12 grams per kilogram of body weight. Somebody that's really is really absorbing everything well and metabolizing things well. So they may act, and maybe somebody that's very depleted already, they're going to need those extra carbohydrates to be
Right.
able to do that. And the way we kind of do the loading is we kind of do the loading kind of in the middle of the week is the recommendation, because if you can load on Wednesday, Thursday, if you do a really aggressive load on Wednesday, you can really see what you look like on Thursday. And then now on Thursday, you can make an educated decision based on how you look, based on how you weigh, based on all these other variables. You can say, okay, maybe I pushed too hard. You can pull back a little bit on Thursday.
Right.
Or maybe I didn't push hard enough. You can push harder on Thursday. Or maybe you push just right, and I just kind of maintain on Thursday in terms of what you did during that point in time. And then by Friday's kind of now your fine tuning component, where you're now trying to say, you're just trying to land the plane just right. It's like, and now you're kind of manipulating all the variables in terms of, what do I need? How am I looking? How am I weighing? Am I too full? Am I too flat? And then you can make adjustments accordingly. But it gives you time to make those adjustments. And that's why it's sometimes difficult if you're trying to kind of make a weight class. And this is where the issue is you actually kind of run out of time. Like, you only have maybe 24 hours to fill out. That might not be enough time for an individual to be able to do that, especially if you're extremely depleted. So the scenario we lay out is kind of nice, because you're able to take advantage of loading the intramuscular triglycerides early on, which is going to help actually in maintaining your glycogen supercompensation during later in the week. And then the second thing you do is now you fill out the glycogen with the water, and then you can actually, again, make adjustments as needed, whether you need to add more carbs or take less carbs to land the plane perfectly and see how your body is responding. And this is without necessarily, at this point in time, without manipulating anything else. I think some mistakes bodybuilders make is they maybe they try to carb load and then they don't give their body water. Well, part of what helps the carb loading is the water, because it's going to draw water into the muscle. So if you're not giving it any water, that makes it kind of hard to be able to do that. And another issue they make is they maybe cut out the sodium. And one thing that we actually point out in the paper is you have those sodium glucose transport proteins that help to transport the carbohydrate from your gut into where it needs to go. And if you don't have sodium, then those sodium dependent glucose transport proteins are not there to be able to transport that. You don't have the capability. And this is what leads to a lot of this potentially, hypothetically, gastrointestinal discomfort, diarrhea, because you maybe didn't give yourself water and or the electrolytes to be able to absorb them appropriately.
Right. Yeah, some competitors maybe are pulling water and sodium like way early in the week, and that's hindering their ability to load properly. And then, I mean, whether it's the cheeseburger and foods they haven't eaten all prep, trying to load on those, on top of maybe reducing and restricting some of these other things, whether it's a combination. I'm sure that plays a role though. But yeah, trying to load without fluid, without the sodium, impairs potentially the carbohydrate load, and then also maybe causes some digestive distress. So yeah,
exactly.
I like the framework you guys laid out in that paper, because like you mentioned, you have adequate time, especially say you overdid your load and spilled on even Thursday, you still have Friday a lot in a lot of cases, to kind of fix that. And then if not, I like what you guys did. And I think like something that I would strategize to do, I think what I did with this last show is I just went to maintenance. I brought my fats to like, you could either, in the paper, you guys, I think, went back to kind of like the fat loading structure with a little bit of carbohydrates. I kind of went to maintenance, brought my fats to like 0.3 grams per pound, had a little bit of carb, and kind of just held constant there. Maybe some of those fats towards the nighttime to kind of hold the load. But yeah, so that structure is awesome. I think from my practical experience, just to kind of give, I'm going to do my own content around like all the peaks I did and stuff. But so I did very similar to what you were discussing, where I brought calories to maintenance, or roughly a maintenance amount, allocated my protein, and then still had a little bit of carbohydrates, and then whatever was left over, I added allocated to fat calories, which ended up being like 150, maybe 200 grams of fat, mostly from nuts and seeds and things like that, nut butter, maybe a little bit of red meat and stuff like that too. Like you mentioned, and with the saturated fat potentially being inflammatory, we're trying to reduce inflammation. And then, so you mentioned the 4 to 10 to 12 grams of carbohydrates per kilogram per kg as the load. And I think I've heard somewhere that like maybe the max that you can hold is like 20 to 23 grams per kilogram. So obviously not exceeding that over the 2 to 3 day loading period might be smart, or not going above that unless you're just like crazy fast metabolism, ridiculous, you depleted and all that stuff. So that's maybe potentially your ceiling, but potentially loading heavier on that first day, and then kind of tapering down towards the show. And then,
yeah,
so
it's
you
funny
mentioned
because before I used to, for years and years, I would start more conservative and kind of drop the hammer at the
cramp
end.
it up, yeah.
But that sets you up kind of for more failure, because if you drop the hammer, maybe you hit it too hard.
Yeah.
So really, I prefer to hit the hammer early now and really kind of see like, hey, what did my body do? And then
adjust
if I need
accordingly.
to hit it harder, I can always hit it harder. But I can always back up.
You're not in like,
you have time to adjust if you need to on Thursday and or Friday. But if you go too light on Wednesday, you can't make that up. And one thing that I did want to mention too is protein. I tend to keep it fairly high, but when I carb load to kind of keep the calories to get more of my carbohydrates in, I
Right.
actually do lower
Reduce it.
it on my carb loading
Right.
days, because I want a lot more of my calories to come from that. Now, I don't lower it to like super low amounts. I may go to like 1.6 grams per kilogram of body
Right.
weight, or
Yeah.
1.8
Yeah.
grams.
Hmm.
But when I'm, during the other stages, it may be up to 2.7 to 3.3 grams per kilogram of body weight.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Most definitely. That makes sense. Protein might have this small diuretic effect, and then also on the other days, on not on the carb loading, but then carbohydrates are very protein sparing, so you're not
Yep.
going to need as much protein anyway. And what was the one thing I was going to mention? Um, Not GI, but carbohydrates are protein sparing, and I don't know. I lost my train of thought. Diet brain right now. But yeah,
Well,
so
I do have one thing to add, and maybe this is what you're going to say, is protein makes you feel very full, and
oh yeah, yeah,
sometimes eating all those carbs when you're eating all that protein makes it feel like, oh my god, like I don't want to eat anymore. So
yeah,
I think that kind of helps as well, because I know when I eat a lot of protein, try and eat 300 grams of protein and 800 grams of carbs, man, like I'm eating. So, but if I'm only eating 150 grams of protein and 800 grams of carbs, that makes it a lot more doable.
yeah, yeah, most definitely. And one thing to mention, I think you mentioned in this paper, is sticking with carbohydrates and food choices that you're familiar with as well, especially on that load. Obviously, like it might be difficult because you've probably been eating more fibrous carbs throughout the prep, but having like stuff at least is consistent and know that digests well, because obviously loading on oatmeal and potatoes is going to be really difficult to pull off. But loading with something that you've never had, like or haven't had all prep, or maybe there's some dairy and you're not, you haven't been eating dairy, like there's definitely some consideration there. Another thing that I would like to mention is fiber is probably reducing that with the load, and then especially really close to the show is getting that fiber down. Could you mention why we might want to reduce fiber in close proximity to the show?
Yeah, no, that's actually a great concept, and you hit it on the nose there with the oatmeal. I really, the last few weeks, I really try to. I mean, I love oatmeal, but I really try to switch to more of a cream of
Yeah,
rice or a cream of wheat type of substance, which is essentially much lower in fiber.
right.
Um,
And volume
but
too.
but for a couple of reasons. Number one is, if you actually look at the macronutrient profile, you can actually get a little more carbohydrate for your buck in the cream of rice and the cream of
Right.
wheat compared to the oatmeal, and you actually have a lower fiber profile, which kind of hits on this component when you're consuming a lot of fiber. So a lot of these cruciferous vegetables, etc., they may actually kind of sit in your gut a little bit, especially the FODMAP type of fiber type of products. So it's important to, I think, cut back on those. And some of the research, a lot of that has actually been done on some of the fighters that are trying to make weight, because you can actually retain a little bit of fluid in your gut from that fiber, which is actually not an ideal scenario, especially as a bodybuilder. You want to keep your waistline a little bit smaller, keep it a little more streamlined. You don't want to have GI discomfort. And when you're consuming high fiber foods this close to the show, you may create some of that discomfort. And in addition, fiber is also very filling, just like protein. So you're trying to get this other food in. It makes it really difficult to do it. So typically, again, I err on the side of lower fiber type foods in terms of my carbohydrate that I'm used to. So really, that kind of boils down to like rice, cream of rice, maybe cream of wheat, rice cakes, etc. I will incorporate a little bit of potato and yam, but it's not,
Right.
it's not in like huge quantities, just because it's going to be too much for the body to handle at that point in time.
Right.
And I mean, years ago, I used to try to carb up with literally pounds of sweet potato, and man, that was miserable on the GI tract.
Yeah.
So a little bit goes a long way, because you want a little bit of fiber, but not so much. I mean,
Right.
we usually recommend about maybe 12 to 18 grams of fiber those last few days.
Right.
So enough to
Not
kind of
none,
keep the
but
bowels movement, but not excessive.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think, yeah, you mentioned in the paper reducing those potentially those FODMAPs and cruciferous vegetables too, because those can cause a little bit more of gas and distress in the GI. I usually stick to like squash and stuff like that because I just know it digests really well for me. Um, so a few other things. You mentioned keeping that potato in. That also serves the purpose with the load of the having some potassium. So maybe you could just touch briefly on the what we might want to do with water, sodium, and potassium throughout these days if we choose to manipulate those variables. And in the context that we don't, what might we want to do with those? Maybe start with that, and then what we would do if we are choosing to manipulate those variables.
Yeah, and I think sometimes if you want to err on the side of caution, you never competed before, you never done things. I think not manipulating the water is probably the best thing to do. So if whatever you've been drinking, keep drinking that as your baseline. So if you've been drinking, 6 liters of water, 5 liters of water on a regular basis, and you look good, you feel good with that, maintain that all the way
Yeah.
through. And if anything, maybe the last, 10 hours, 8 hours before the show, you can kind of err on the side of not drinking. What I like to do is the morning of, that's when I really maybe don't drink a lot because I don't need to. So I'll usually drink my water like normal. I may taper it down. So I'm gonna kind of go on a baseline. If I normally drink 6 liters of water, maybe the day before I'll taper it down to maybe 4 liters of water, 3 to 4 liters of water. So I still have plenty of fluid in me. And then I drink most of the fluid earlier on, and as I'm kind of
Mm-hmm.
going into the evening, maybe about 12 hours before, I now start kind of slowly tapering the water, still keeping it in there, but not necessarily dropping it. Then I go to bed, and of course, the night before the show, you're typically not sleeping anyway. But I go to bed, and during that time, I'm really not drinking, a lot of fluids during that point in time, or any fluids really, because I normally don't drink when I'm sleeping anyway. And then I wake up, and I'll have minimal water, enough to maybe wash my food down, but I'm not going to be gulping my water because that does tend to kind of, for me, distend my stomach a little bit over time.
Right.
And I'm usually, most of us for prejudging for bodybuilding, that's typically around, for most shows, 9, 10 o'clock is when you're going to be up on stage. So I'm
Yeah.
eating my first meal around maybe 5 or 6 in the morning, with a little bit of fluid, and then my next meal I might not need any water because it's usually going to be some rice cake, something dry, uh,
Yeah.
and then I might wet my mouth a little bit, and then I'll consume my water again. Once I step off stage again, I'll go back to drinking.
Right.
Again, not an excessive amount because I'm going to have the night show later or maybe the next day, but I'm going to still drink, relatively in a tapered fashion, but I'm still going to keep my fluids in.
Right, right. So reducing those fluids in close proximity to the stage, having that consideration, even getting off the prejudging, like, hey, I'm going to consume some water, and then maybe kind of chill out towards the nighttime, which is exactly what I did. Sodium. Are you doing anything with sodium throughout this?
Yeah, and this is what's kind of important, and it kind of depends on what it is you're doing. If you're gonna manipulate water and you're gonna do like a water loading, water depletion strategy, then you have to make sure that you time your sodium appropriately, because if you're increasing water intake, then that's going to basically dilute your sodium levels. It's going to alter your blood pressure, and then your body's going to go through this whole basic homeostasis type of component. So if you're increasing your water intake, then you almost need to increase your sodium intake, so that way you don't basically dilute the sodium intake. And during that time, if you're doing the water loading strategy, you're also doing that during the time when you're carb depleting. So we talked about why you need the sodium in there. So if you've depleted your sodium and you're carb loading, now you maybe don't have those sodium dependent glucose transport proteins to be able to use that. So if you're going to manipulate the sodium and the water, and sodium and water kind of go hand in hand because one affects the other. Obviously, the less water you have, that's going to impact what happens to your sodium levels, or the more water you have, that's going to impact your sodium levels. And then obviously you have to keep in mind what's happening to potassium. I don't usually mess too much with potassium, except just so I'm not going to take an extra potassium supplement,
Yeah.
but I am going to be conscientious. It's like things like potato, they're going to have a little bit more potassium in there.
Right.
So consuming a little bit of that will actually kind of keep that fluid, because that's going to actually help in the in keeping the fluid balance in a more favorable position to where you want it. So I think those two, sodium and water, are the trickiest to manipulate. And if you do it, you better have kind of practice and kind of know what you're doing. More often than not, I've kind of preferred to like not play with those as much, and and really be a little bit more conservative. I did do a water loading for the last show. I actually collected some data on my last two shows, and we actually looked at intracellular, extracellular water. I carried this damn device with me everywhere, cross country, to be able to get some measurements.
But bioelectrical impedance.
Yeah, we did a bioimpedance spectroscopy, which actually it's got 250 plus frequencies that we actually measure. So it can measure phase angle, and it measures impedance and reactance, and so we can look at the raw data. But just looking at the output of the data, which is looking at the intracellular and extracellular fluid compartments, you can actually see you can influence a favorable shift toward increasing intracellular water and decreasing extracellular water with using some of these scenarios. At least it did with me twice, and it did with my wife as well, and it did with Chris in his study.
In the case study,
we have 3 data points so far. Ours hasn't, mine hasn't been published, and the ones that I collected on my wife hasn't been, but the one that we did on Chris, we did publish that, and it did have some favorable effects.
Yeah. So, and then, so as far as that goes, do you have maybe 5-10 minutes just to touch on the case study paper?
Yeah, I got another 5 minutes is good. Perfect. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So, with all that said, all this stuff is laid out in the peaking paper. I think it's really important for whoever reads this paper, all the framework that Guillermo laid out here is, if you read the paper and you actually understand the principles and some of the mechanisms behind it, you can better understand how to implement it. They do actually give an actual framework and a table in there, which you can follow. But I think once I started to practice the peak, once I started to understand the principles as why we applied these things, or why they chose to apply these things, or the theoretical framework as to which you might apply these things, you get a better understanding for how you might manipulate those variables. Whereas like you know where you might want to pull water or manipulate sodium. I think really reading that and thoroughly understanding that before you start playing with some of these variables is probably a really important thing to do, so you understand why you might be doing something, and maybe sticking to the more conservative side if I were to give any recommendations to people. Because now, like, as you're mentioning this stuff, it makes a lot of sense, because I've read your paper, I've watched all the podcasts and great videos that people have out on the internet about peaking. There's a lot of evidence-based coaches. I'll actually link all those below. But just understanding the principles as to why you might apply something is really important before you start playing with all these variables. So there was a case study done with one of the authors on the original paper, Chris Barakat. What are some things that were confirmed via this paper? Some things that maybe we're still kind of unsure on. Could you just touch on the results and some of the specifics of this paper?
Yeah, no, it was really interesting, because basically we try to basically see if hey, that our recommendations on that peak week paper, how do they actually play out when we're actually implementing them on an individual. So Chris is a natural pro bodybuilder, and he carried out the protocol, and I mean he was just a trooper. I'm talking like this guy got up, literally like 8 days out from the show, he was doing DEXA scans, and even the morning of the show, he was at the university lab at 4 a.m, getting ultrasound measurements and getting a DEXA done. I mean, talk about going into the name of science. I mean,
yeah, really,
like, that's the last thing I want to do before I go step on stage at 9 a.m. is go to 100%. The university lab and get all my measurements done on ultrasound and DEXA and do all this other stuff. But anyway, what we actually found a few highlights of the study was, number one is carbohydrate loading had a very favorable effect. So he was actually able to do, he did the fat loading along with the carbohydrate loading. And we actually found an increase in muscle thickness in several sites. So we measured muscle thickness with the ultrasound, and we actually saw, it's like, hey, did the muscle actually get a little thicker over time in various areas? We looked at the thigh, we looked at the tricep. So we looked at a couple of different points. Obviously, you can't measure every single one, that's not feasible, but we measured some upper body, some lower body landmarks, and we were able to see, it's like, hey, we actually increased the size of the muscle in thickness with the ultrasound. The other thing that we looked at is we looked at the subcutaneous layer. Did the subcutaneous layer decrease? Which is that's kind of the bodybuilding goal, right? Is make your muscle bigger, make the subcutaneous layer smaller. We were able to find favorable shifts in that, and that subcutaneous layer was able to actually decrease in some of these certain areas. The other thing that we looked at was the intracellular and the extracellular water, and there were some favorable shifts again in increasing the intracellular water, which is what we want, and having a higher intracellular to extracellular water ratio in a more favorable direction. And there was actually some scientists initially postulated that it's like, hey, you can't manipulate this ratio. But now we actually have two papers. One was published from Brazil in maybe about 6 or 8 months ago by I want to say Demorais, and they actually looked at. They didn't report how they did it, but the techniques used by these bodybuilders, these Brazilian bodybuilders, they were actually able to manipulate the intracellular and extracellular water ratio in a favorable direction.
Yeah.
Chris was able to do the same thing, and we found again in myself and in my wife, so in a man and a woman, we were able to shift in a favorable direction as well if you're doing things the right way. So that's all very interesting. And again, I think there's more that we need to explore that a lot more. I don't think 100%. This is far from definitive evidence, but it's some initial evidence in the right direction for us to explore further.
Right. And if you're looking at like you're very integrated with your approach, if you're looking at the practical, what's been applied in bodybuilding for years, it's exactly what we've been doing. Now we have these case studies, and now hopefully we can get some more controlled research as we move forward. You also, there's one with the silhouettes too. Wasn't measuring intra and extracellular fluid, but the actual silhouettes with the carb loading, where they fed bodybuilders various amounts of carbohydrates and looked at their silhouettes, and the ones who ate more carbohydrates had a better outcome because of the actual shape and structure, which may be kind of hinting towards the fact that carbohydrate load changed their structure and physique to where it was more favorable for the outcome. So and then from now on, I mean, now we have more reason to do this research, right? Which is really, really cool. I can't imagine bodybuilding is like in bodybuilding competition prep is high on the priority, unfortunately, but it's still really cool to see this work being done, because obviously we're passionate about this, body composition manipulation and things like that. So it's really awesome. And I just got to say, thank you for contributing in the way you do, because I think what you do helps keep bodybuilding alive. And it's something that I strive for myself, is making sure that this sport continues to thrive, and doing things like this are really, really important, I think.
I really appreciate it. Yeah. And if you're a bodybuilder and you dig the science, so if you're able to participate and contribute as a participant, we as scientists appreciate you, and it's we can't do it without you. So if there's a survey you can fill out, or if there's some data points you can serve as a guinea pig, I want to call it, and participate in some of these surveys or some of these studies. That's the only way we can learn more. So I encourage you to participate. So thank you for inviting me, Dylan. I really appreciate you having me, and I appreciate everything that you're doing, and providing a more evidence-based approach for bodybuilding.
Yeah, we're all in this together, man. I think that it's very important what you're doing, and if you could just plug real quick where a lot of your content is, where people can find you and your research and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me on Instagram at Dr. GFit. It's one word. So Dr. GFit all spelled out. You can also I actually just started on a website, so it's still a work in progress, but I actually have some content up now, and it's
Sweet.
drgfit.com. Which has basically it links to all of my publications on there.
Awesome.
It's got links to some of my podcasts that I've done over the last couple of years related to fasted versus fed cardio, related to peak week, related to various things that people want to talk about in regards to health and fitness. And I'm going to be kind of continuing to put more content up on that website, but that is where you can find me as well. So
Yeah.
I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, thanks for coming on, Dr. Escalante. I'll link all your stuff down below. I would love to in the future maybe get on and talk about some other stuff like safer ways to go about bodybuilding and things like that. If you would be interested months down the line, but that'd be something.
Oh, I would definitely love it. We have we put a case study on. We looked at autopsies of dead bodybuilders under the age of 50. We're working on that now. We actually looked at autopsy reports, and we have some cool stuff coming out, and that's another
awesome.
area that's a big interest to me.
Absolutely.
With,
and I think
safer PED models and
yes.
How can we be smarter?
Yeah, medications, mitigating risks. It's a big part of why I'm in coaching currently too. And I think that'd be an awesome conversation. So I'll let you get out of here. Thanks for your time again. Enjoy your off season. Enjoy, having some good food and being a normal human. I'll be joining you here soon with off season stuff. So thanks again for coming on, man.
Absolutely. Good luck to the USAs.
Thank you. Thank you so much.